Breaking sanity. I look in the mirror and wonder, when did this happen to me? I had been staring at what I had become for over an hour. These dramatic changes to my body and mental state. All of it began a year ago when my sister was taken by it. It was a cold December night. I was 17, and my parents had left me with my sister at her apartment so they could go to some Christmas party for adults. Everything was going fine. My sister and I stayed up watching horror movies, which in hindsight was pretty ironic. After a while, I started getting bored and began messing with my hair. Will you just cut your damn hair already, Tony? A guy's hair isn't meant to be that long anyway. Screw you, Tammy. It's my hair. I'll do what I want. She never liked the fact that I grew out my hair during freshman year. She always told me to cut it, thinking that because she was 2 years older, she could boss me around. I never held it against her, though. She was my sister, after all, or was. We stayed up until midnight, and that's when the end began for me. At midnight, the power went out in the middle of watching the original Evil Dead. At first, we weren't too freaked out. Then one of the neighbor's dogs, who never shut up, suddenly stopped barking, followed by a faint whimper. At this point, we were becoming concerned, trying not to let our paranoia get the better of us. After several moments of dead silence, we heard a racket from the kitchen, making us both jump. Of course, it was her stupid cat, Mittens. We awkwardly chuckled about it. But then we heard a scream from down the hall, which made the hairs on our necks stand up. It didn't sound human. The lights started flickering on and off, becoming more rapid and intense. The flickering became violent, and we heard whispers. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it felt like they were searching for something or someone. We both started to panic, backing up into a corner as far away from the door as we could get. Then there came this sound, a ringing that began drilling through my head. I held my ears, trying to shut it out, but it didn't help at all. It was like it was coming from inside my own head. Finally, we saw an ominous shadow appear beneath the door, the ringing noise growing louder. I did my best to hold in the searing pain, but it seemed like it was going to overwhelm me. Before I could find out, my sister was the first to crack, letting out a piercing scream. As she did, the door flew off its hinges to reveal a man. A tall, thin man who seemed to stand in front of a blinding light. As we stared at this man, the ringing stopped. It was dead silent. I could only see that his face was as pale as the moon. The ringing had been so aggravating it blurred my vision, and the light was so bright. Yet, as we saw this man, he seemed more like an entity. There was no way he was human. He stood there in the doorway, staring at us, and we were caught in awe. My sister stood up and moved toward the figure. I tried to reach out to grab her, but I was in too much shock to move. The figure seemed to slide toward my sister with its arms outstretched, as if to embrace her. I'll never forget what happened next. One moment she was there, standing in front of the tall man. Then came a flash of light, and she was gone. But it was still there. It stared at me as I curled in fear in the corner from what I had witnessed. My vision cleared, and I saw that this thing had no face. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, nothing. After a short while, I began to hear whispers again, and I knew where they were coming from. This creature. It continued to stare at me. As I looked back into its face, the ringing started again, but also something else, a feeling, and this feeling enraged me. Finally, I could take it no longer. What did you do with her? I screamed at it. Where is she? But to no avail. It continued to just stare as if it were intrigued by me. As it continued, a terrible feeling grew in my chest. It was becoming unbearable. Give her back to me, I commanded, but it continued to stare. All the while, the feeling in my chest grew. The ringing got louder. The lights began flickering again, and the whispers sped up. I could not stand it anymore. I picked up a fallen lamp and threw it at the tall, thin man, an action I wish I could take back. As the lamp made contact with him, he immediately dissipated, which seemed to short-circuit all the lights in the room and out in the hall. The ringing in my ears exploded, causing me to pass out. The next thing I knew, I woke up in our room with my mother asleep in a chair, surrounded by get-well cards and balloons. My mother woke up around the same time my father arrived. They explained everything as best they could. The police assumed a serial killer managed to cut the lights in the apartment complex and disable all security cameras. Then he made his way to our floor, where the police found several mutilated bodies of people and a dog. In several of the victims' rooms, there was a circle on the walls filled in with a large X. I had been unconscious for 2 weeks following the incident, and I was the only survivor on the floor the serial killer had visited. My parents told me that the police would want to interview me about what happened and that they'd be there shortly. Until then, I was to eat some breakfast and try my best to rest, which was easier said than done. They also took my weight and height, 150 pounds, and 5 feet 8 inches. As I was eating breakfast, I felt a strange, familiar sensation, a feeling groping my chest as if something was trying to get out. I assumed I had to throw up, so I went to the restroom. As I stood there, in an ER bathroom, I stared at myself in the mirror and noticed I was pretty pale. I was sickened by what I saw. All I could think about was how I let my sister be taken by that thing. After several minutes in the bathroom, I managed to throw up, but it didn't really make me feel any better. In fact, I could almost hear those haunting whispers at the back of my head again, and a faint ringing. When the police interviewed me, I told them everything I remembered. I told them about the thin man that didn't seem human, and how my sister vanished in a blinding light. Of course, they didn't believe a distressed teenager and recommended my parents take me to a therapist because I was showing signs of post-traumatic stress. They did, and the therapist I saw did her best to help me, though I can't remember her name. After a while, I stopped trying to convince others of what I saw. They just refused to believe something unbelievable, as ironic as that sounds. Life never moved on for me after that. I would always have nightmares about that creature. I would dream I was in the apartment again, staring at the creature, screaming at it. Only I wasn't screaming what I said in the apartment. Instead, I was asking it, "What are you?" Only to hear those haunting whispers digging into my brain. Every time I have that dream, I wake up sweating, go to the bathroom to wash my face, and stare at myself in the mirror, remembering that godforsaken ringing. 3 months after my sister's disappearance, I decided I was ready to go back to school. Only I wasn't ready. All my friends barely recognized me because I had become so pale. When lunch came around, I was almost always too depressed and disgusted with myself to eat. I talked less and less, and my friends grew concerned for me. But I didn't care. I was becoming detached from the world around me. Then came that awful day, the day I wished had never come, but knew would. As I was sitting alone in the halls during lunch, the wind started to rustle. I didn't pay much attention to it. I was too busy writing in my journal, a relaxation method my therapist had recommended. Suddenly, that vile ringing returned, giving me a migraine. I stood up to get some water, but before I could do so, I froze in place at what I saw. At the end of the hall, peeking from behind a corner, I saw him, the slender man, as the authorities had started calling him. Before I could properly register what I saw, I blinked, and that thing disappeared. I rubbed my eyes to make sure I wasn't seeing things. As I lowered my hands, he was still nowhere to be seen. The ringing subsided a bit, but didn't completely fade, so I rushed to the bathroom and turned on the faucets to wash my face. I told myself, it wasn't real. He wasn't there. He isn't real. As I continued, the ringing faded, and I turned off the water and dried my face with my shirt. When I finally managed to look up at the mirror, to my horror, instead of seeing my pale, sickly face, I saw the slender man's. I quickly jumped back in shock, but when I took another look at the mirror, he was gone again. The ringing returned, excruciatingly loud, but it didn't bother me because that gripping feeling in my chest had also returned. In blind rage, I broke the mirror, screaming, "You're not real! You're not real! You're not real!" Sharp, jagged pieces of the mirror fell to the floor. I picked one up, slashed my hands, and wrote those words over and over on the walls. Several minutes later, one of my friends found me passed out. An ambulance was called. Again, I woke up in an ER room. This time, I had only been out for a few days. I saw the stitches on my hands and thought, crap. I tried getting up, but losing so much blood had made me woozy. After a while, a psychiatrist came to diagnose me. I told him what I had seen, and he labeled me with schizophrenia. He also told me that my hallucinations were only as real as I let them be. The more I was told I was crazy, the more I started to believe it. He was also concerned about my weight. I had apparently dropped from a healthy 155 pounds to an alarming 110, and I had the neglected physique to prove it. My ribs were beginning to show. On the bright side, though, I had grown 3 inches. I just thought, whoop-de-doo. I stayed home for the rest of the school year, but that didn't really help. I still wasn't eating, and I was still seeing the slender man in my dreams and in real life. It reached a point where I was too scared to even sleep. When I did sleep, it was always the same dream. At that point, when I woke up, I saw how distraught I was with everything going on. When I didn't sleep, I'd see a figure outside my window, at the bus stop, on the street corner, or even on the patio. I knew it was him. No matter what anyone said at this point, I knew it was him. It was 10 months after the slender man took my sister. I was at home feeling sick again, and I had come down with a fever. It was extremely hot for some reason. I thought maybe the AC was off. Soon enough, I got that feeling in my chest again, so I ran to the bathroom to throw up. I was there for several minutes, but nothing came out. The feeling just became more intense, and it seemed like it was getting hotter. I looked in the mirror, barely noticing the ringing that had been there since the feeling started, and it made me agitated. I finally couldn't take the heat anymore, so I opened the mirror cabinet and grabbed my dad's shaver. I turned it on and let it loose on my sweat-soaked hair. It didn't make anything better. The feeling stayed with me. A few days later, it was time for the annual height measurement my mom would do with my sister and me. I couldn't believe she actually wanted to do this. When I looked into her eyes, though, I could see that she needed to do this to help her get through the pain she's been in. The pain we've both been in. As distasteful as it was at this time, I complied. When she lit up at seeing that I was now 6 feet 2 inches, it was almost worth the painful memories that were brought back. I know she meant well, though. Now it's been a full year since Slender Man took her from me. Last night was my last night of sleep. After having the same dream for the umpteenth time, I finally understood those haunting whispers from that day. As I look in the mirror today on the anniversary of my sister's death, I do not hear ringing. I hear the laughter of children. Today, we went to a memorial service in honor of my sister. As I looked at my suit and red tie, my mother came in to see my pitiful visage. The only compliment she could give was how remarkably tall I had gotten in the past year. But I could see the pain in her eyes. Not only did she lose one child, but she was losing another to depression and insanity. I was pale as ash and as thin as a skeleton at this point. As I returned to the bathroom one final time to look at myself in the mirror, I heard the laughter of my sister. What I saw in the mirror horrified me. I went back to my room and grabbed a piece of paper and a pencil to write down what the whispers had told me. I'm doing this because I'm tired and because I don't think I'm waking up. Hopefully, I'm going to be with my sister. I understand now that on that night when the Slender Man took my sister, it did something to me. It chose me, and I want people to know what it told me before I lose myself. We were conceived by the sins of man, born in their anger and hatred, given shape by their fears and paranoia.